River Tragedy. After a time, Bixby decided to farm out his cub, and Sam was put on the John Roy, a slow boat known for its jolly parties and easygoing ways. Sam often sang for the company or told jokes. He was also keeping up with his reading, and he spent a good deal of his time bent over book. Then came his transfer to the famous steamboat Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania was one of the finest boats on the river, and Sam could hardly believe his good fortune. He had visions of himself being the most envied cub up and down the Mississippi. But his joy was short lived. The pilot Sam had to work with, Tom Brown, was miserably mean, sharply scarce, sarcastic man. Sarcastic man. He was impossible to please, incapable of understanding, and determined to making life unbearable for anyone who worked under him. I often wanted to kill Brown, Sam confessed in Life on the Mississippi. But this would not answer. A cub had to take everything his boss gave in the way of vigorous comment and criticism, and we all believe that there was a States law making it a penitentiary offense to strike or threaten a pilot who was on duty. However, I could imagine myself killing Brown. There was no law against that, and that was the thing I used always to do the moment I was bad. Instead of going over my river in my mind, as was my duty, I threw business aside for pleasure and killed Brown. I killed Brown every night for months, not in old stall, commonplace ways, but in new and picturesque ones, ways that were sometimes surprising for freshness of design and ghastliness of situation and environment. Brown would not overlook the smallest mistake. He was always on the lookout for a fault and always finding one even if he had to invent it. Nevertheless, Sam tried to get along with him. He wanted Bixby to be proud of him, and he wanted to succeed on his own. About this time, too, his younger brother Henry wanted to go on the river. Henry had grown at 20 to look very much like his brother, with curly red hair and bright sparkling eyes. Sam used his influence to get Henry a position on the Pennsylvania as a mud clerk, a position without salary. Brown dragged with both the boys. But he seemed to find the gentle, good-natured Henry a special target for his criticism and complaints. In May of 1858, things came to a head. On that day, Brown was steering and Sam was in the pilot house with him. Henry appeared on the hurricane deck and shouted that the captain wanted to stop a mile or so down the river. Brown said nothing, gave no sign that he had heard, but neither boy thought this was strange. Brown was such an ordinary man that there was no knowing what he would do to spite his charges. Sam knew that Brown was deaf, though Brown always denied this, and he thought perhaps Brown hadn't heard. He looked at the pilot and was about to say something, but knowing Brown's terrible disposition, Sam decided to keep silence. The boat went right by the plantation. Presently, the captain appeared and demanded to know why they hadn't stopped. "Didn't Henry tell you to land here?" he asked. "No, sir," said Brown. "I sent him up to do it." "He did come up," Brown said, "and that's all the good it done. And do darn fool. He never said anything." Then the captain turned to Sam. Didn't you hear him?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Sam Clemens said. "Shut your mouth," exploded Brown. "You never heard anything of the kind." The captain disappeared below deck and the pilot ordered the boat to turn around. Sam Clemens stood in silence. About an hour later, Henry came up. Innocent that there had been any argument, Brown seized him immediately. "Here, why didn't you tell me we would got to land at that plantation?" Henry protested that he had. "It's a lie," Brown said furiously. Sam could stand no more. You lie yourself." "He did tell you," he interrupted. Brown ordered Henry out of the pilot house, and as he started out, Brown picked up a 10-pound lump of coal and started after him. Sam sprang between them. He also snatched up a heavy stool and hit Brown so hard that Brown was stretched out. He had committed the most unpardonable of all crimes. He had struck a pilot on duty. Sam felt that he was booked for the penitentiary and couldn't be booked any surer if he went on and squared my long account with this person while I had the chance. Consequently, I stuck to him and pounded him with my fists a considerable time. I do not know how long, he says. The pleasure of it probably made it seem longer than it really was. Meanwhile, the steamboat was proceeding down river without anyone at the wheel. Presently, Brown came to his senses, struggled up, and went to the wheel. Sam left the pilot house. Of course, there was the captain to confront. He took Sam into his parlor after the watch was over, locked the door, and sat down. "So, you have been fighting, Mr. Brown?" he asked. There was nothing to do but admit the truth. "Do you know that is a very serious matter?" Sam had to concede that it was. "Are you aware that this boat was plowing down the river fully 5 minutes with no one at the wheel?" Sam had to admit this too was true. "Did you strike him first?" It was again the truth. "With what?" the captain asked. "A stool, sir." "Hard?" "Middling, sir." "Did it knock him down?" He fell, sir." "Did you follow it up? Did you do anything further?" "Yes, sir." "What did you do?" "Pounded him, sir." "Pounded him?" "Yes, sir." "Did you pound him much?" "That is, severely." One might call it that, sir. Maybe. I'm deuce glad of it. Heart dear. Never mention that I said that. You have been guilty of a great crime. And don't you ever be guilty of it again on this boat, but lay for him ashore. Give him a good sound thrashing. Do you hear? I will pay the expenses. Now go and mind you, not a word of this to anybody. Clear out with you. You have been guilty of a great crime. You help. But Brown was so indignant that he insisted that Sam leave the boat. When the Pennsylvania reached New Orleans, the captain gave him orders on another boat going up to St. Louis. Henry, however, was to stay behind on the Pennsylvania. In New Orleans, Sam often made some money by guarding the freight piles from 7-8 night until 7 in the morning. Being paid nothing as a cub pilot, he was glad to have a chance to pick up the new few dollars that the work brought him. Now he took the job again. It was a 3-night job and usually was open once a month. He was lucky to find that he could get work until his new boat left. Henry sometimes wandered down to talk with his brother around 9 o'clock when his own duty were over. On the last night that Sam and Henry spent together before Henry went back to the Pennsylvania and Sam went to the 80 Lacey, the two boys had a long talk. Sam gave Henry some advice. They had been speaking of accidents on the steamboats, and Sam said, in case of disaster to the boat, don't lose your head. Leave that unwisdom to the passengers. They are competent. They will attend to it. But you rush for the hurricane deck and astern to the solitary lifeboat lashed aft the wheelhouse on the port side and obey the mate's orders. Thus you will be useful. When the boat is launched, give such help as you can in getting the women and children into it. And be sure you don't try to get into it yourself. It is summer weather. The river is only a mile wide as a rule, and you can swim ashore without any trouble. Sam did not realize how prophetic his words were to be. A few nights later, the Pennsylvania blew up at Ship Island near Memphis. The great steamboat had been putting on fuel. Nearly everyone was asleep. Suddenly and unexpectedly, 4 of the 8 boilers exploded. The blast blew Henry into the river. Nothing was ever heard of Brown again. Henry thought he was all right and remembered what his brother had told him about helping the stricken. He swam back to the boat to see what he could do for those who were hurt. In reality, he was one of the worst casualties. Sam read in one paper that Henry had been scalded in, then in another that he was all right. At every port the story was different, but the truth was that he had inhaled steam and he had been scalded. When Sam finally got to his brother, he realized that there was very little hope. Day and night he sat by Henry, praying for some miracle to save his brother. Henry was laying on a mattress on the floor with 30 or 40 other patients, most of them scald and steam victims. Henry had inhaled a great quantity of steam and his body had been badly scalded. The doctors felt there was little hope, since there were more patients than the doctors and nurses could attend. The fatally injured ones, such as Henry, were getting only a bare minimum of care. But Dr. Peyton, at the urging of Sam, took over Henry's care, and after a week, the physician thought there was some hope of saving the boy. Finally, he said Henry would get well, but that he must have a good deal of rest and quiet. If the other patients' outcries and mourning disturbed Henry, he should be given morphine, but only an eighth of a grain. The physicians on watch, Sam Clemens wrote many years later in his autobiography, were young fellows hardly out of the medical college, and they made a mistake. They had no way of measuring the eighth of a grain of morphine, so they guessed at it and gave him a vast quantity heaped on the end of a knife blade. Henry died before light next morning.